Hello and happy Thursday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Hinkle. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Interim Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. We're changing it up just a little bit. You're just going to get to see me today. Some of my colleagues in comms aren't feeling particularly camera ready, and we've all been there over the past couple of years. So I just want to remind everybody that we do have members of the PFLAG team that are with you on the various social platforms that you're joining us from. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, they're there to help you out. And let's get to it. As many of you already know, November is a really important month for military families. It's Military Family Appreciation Month. We have Veterans Day on November 11th. What you might not know is that at PFLAG National, we actually support military families all year long through our PFLAG Connects program and through a partnership that we have with the Modern Military Association of America. For Something to Talk About Live this month, we're actually using an article by Thomas Novelli and Konstantin Toropin that appeared on military.com titled "Most of the Military Not Tracking Numbers of Families Relocated Due to Anti-LGBTQ Laws" to guide our conversation. And I am really excited to welcome Cathy Marcello, who is the Assistant Director of Programs at the Modern Military Association of America, and Becca Stewart, who is the primary author of the PFLAG publication At Ease, Support for Military Families with LGBTQ Children and Teens, as our guest this month. So, Cathy, Becca, it's wonderful to see you both. How are you?
Hi, great to be here.
We're doing okay. Thanks for having us.
Doing okay. All right. So I guess first, can you both introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit more about your organization, how you're connected to PFLAG, the work that you do, and if there's anything that you're willing to share about sort of how you identify, your pronouns, etc. I'd love to learn a little bit about that as well.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure. Cathy, let's get started with you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Cathy Marcello. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an Army brat, Army wife, and proud parent to a transgender child. Right now, I'm the Assistant Director of Programs at Modern Military Association of America. MMAA is the largest nonprofit serving LGBTQ service members, veterans, and their families. We've got lots of resources, but I'll highlight our discrimination reporting form, the Strong Communities virtual support group for LGBTQ service members, veterans, and their partners. And the last resource is how I came to be connected with PFLAG, which is when we partnered with PFLAG on the PFLAG Connects military community meetings.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Becca?
So I'm Becca Stewart. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an Air Force spouse, and I'm a proud parent to two older children, both of whom are part of the LGBTQ community. I'm also a writer, as Jamie said, so I was fortunate enough to be part of the PFLAG At Ease publication for military families. And we got involved with our local PFLAG chapter when our youngest came out to us about 5 years ago. And through that, I got connected with PFLAG National and MMAA. And so now I'm fortunate enough to be one of the facilitators of our monthly PFLAG Connects military community meeting. So my life for the last 5 years has kind of been, LGBTQ youth in particular, especially military families. So that's kind of what I do.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us to both of you. And before we start talking about the article specifically, I was wondering if you would share a little bit about how and if and where and when your families recognize things like Military Family Appreciation Month and Veterans Day. Do you do anything special? And do you find that some years it's a little bit easier to celebrate or to be recognized than others? And Becca, why don't we start with you?
Okay, sure. Well, we're living apart right now. So my spouse is in a different state than us. So we're going to actually celebrate this year. He will be here where we are. So we'll celebrate together, which will be nice. And I can't say we do anything special typically. I think maybe the first year or two that he was active duty, we went to one of those, a lot of restaurants offer free meals to veterans on Veterans Day, and it was just bonkers. And so, usually it's we wish him a happy Veterans Day, and the same to our friends. I can say that some years it's easier to celebrate than others. This year, with all that's been going on, it does sort of feel bittersweet, where it feels like on one hand, people say they appreciate our service, but then on the other hand, they're, passing legislation that is hurting our families. So, it's just, it's kind of difficult this year.
I appreciate that insight. And Cathy, what about you?
Yeah, I would echo what Becca is saying. The last 20 years were really hard, and I think we couldn't really celebrate or reflect on Veterans Day activities because we were just trying to survive and like living through it. I'm lucky enough that we're on the other side of it. My spouse retired just a little while ago, and kind of now that we're clear of that immediate very stressful life, we're kind of re-engaging with it. And every year now, I am the camp cook at my sister's trail camp for veterans and service members. And it is an exhausting weekend, but it is so fun to give back and find that community.
Thank you both. I appreciate that sort of view into your lives and what you're willing to share with all of us. And now getting to the article that we used to guide today's conversation. The article itself noted that there really haven't been that many requests from LGBTQ plus service members or service members who have LGBTQ plus dependents that are looking to transfer because of anti-LGBTQ legislation being introduced at the state level. I'm wondering if, based on your personal experiences, based on your professional experiences, why do you think that's the case? Do you think that there are requests that just aren't being received or recorded? Are you hearing about families that are trying to make these requests but really just aren't able to? Or are there families that are having requests denied? Like, what do you think is going on, and why are we not seeing those numbers that people might expect? And Cathy, I'd love to start with you on this one.
Yeah. So first, I'd say that the various militaries are probably not tracking them collectively. And if they are, they're maybe not sharing that with us because we know that almost half of all active duty troops are stationed in states with anti-LGBTQ laws. 5 out of the 6 states with the largest populations of active duty troops have pretty serious anti-LGBTQ laws. And we know that of those troops, there's like 50,000 LGBTQ military affiliated youth, right? So like the problem is there. I think why you may not be seeing it is because military families are so resourceful at fixing the situation themselves. So I think you end up with a lot of families that are maybe like Becca, living apart, right? Like that might statistically not show up for the military. You have people just voluntarily choosing duty stations that are going to be in states without anti-LGBTQ laws. You have people changing their career tracks. You have people retiring early, just straight up ending their careers because they're not going to sacrifice their child's civil rights. And so I think families are finding ways to work within the system that we've been handed. And that's why you might not be seeing those numbers, but the numbers are there for sure.
Well, that was one thing in the article it was talking about, and I believe it was the Air Force reported 15 relocations, using these policies since, now I got to remember 2021 maybe. So clearly, like Cathy was saying, there's obviously more than 15 families who are being affected by this. So one of the things that I hear a lot too is just this confusion and lack of information that I think a lot of military families just it's not being reported because they don't even know where to go to find that information or to get the help, that they need in order to relocate. So I think that's one big part. The second part, I think, is just fear. I think in order to take advantage of some of the programs that are available for military families, you essentially would have to out your child. And certainly in states, if you're already in a state that is hostile towards LGBTQ youth in particular, that's not something a lot of families are willing to do. So you're going to sort of go under the radar and try to find a different solution. Like Cathy was saying, maybe that means, volunteering for something, a job you wouldn't maybe necessarily love to have, but it's in a place that is safer for your child. So I think between the misinformation and the fear, that's probably where there's a lack of, reporting this kind of data.
Yeah, no, that does bring me to the next question that I had, actually, which, this article, I'm not from a military family. I don't have a lot of insight into what it is like to be in a military family. But the article made note of at least a half a dozen different transfer policies that might come into play. So things like an exception to policy to move early, or a humanitarian or safety or compassionate action transfer that might be available to LGBTQ plus service members. And I'm just wondering, do you all have any recommendations for the kinds of tools, resources, information that is available to military families to help them to understand what is available and how to take advantage of the options that do exist if they find themselves in a position that they need to?
Well, I'll start first by saying I would send families to Cathy and MMAA, and that has been such a huge source of information for families who are trying to figure this all out. One thing, at least in the Air Force, that I know has been working fairly well is there is a program called the Exceptional Family Member Program, or EFMP, which basically is a way for the military to ensure that family members, so military dependents, spouses, children, have access to the care they need. Typically, it's for medical issues or developmental issues, learning issues, those kinds of things. And there has been some success with parents, specifically parents of trans kids, because there is there's medical care associated with that. So there is some success with families using the EFMP program to move out of states that might be less affirming. The issue with that, like Cathy was saying, is that there's only a handful of places you can move. And most of the installations that families can go to are not going to be a good place for trans kids. So in theory, these programs can work, but in practice, it's much more difficult, especially as more and more states are passing this kind of legislation.
Yeah, and Cathy, what, if anything, can organizations like MMAA actually do for families to support these service members, to support their dependents if they're looking for those sorts of transfers?
I would say first, have the service member talk to their branch manager. Tell them about your concerns. You don't have to talk about why you have concerns, but you have a concern about moving, and kind of find out what your branch manager for your specific service is going to say are your options. And then we can work from there. So then I would say, come into the Mil Pride private Facebook group. It is a beautiful space. There is nothing like the collective hive mind of military spouse knowledge, right? So if you're talking about maybe you want to use EFMP as a resource, there are going to be families there who have done that and are going to have all the pros and cons. If we're talking about a compassionate reassignment, again, we have had families do that, and we'll be able to discuss the pros and cons. So come to the community. We've got, we might not have the answers, but we've got our own personal experiences, and we can help give you all the knowledge we have. You don't need to do it alone. is what I want people to know. We do have resources. And we also have, beyond the group of, very knowledgeable military spouses, we also have connections to resources where we might be able to connect you to JAG lawyers that specialize in LGBTQ issues, and they might be able to give you even better information.
Okay. And so what I'm realizing is that I just really don't know what I don't know. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for a very well-intentioned ally who wants to learn more about the history of LGBTQ plus inclusion in the armed forces, about the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, about what's going on with service members who were discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell now and are looking to change their discharge or to access benefits. Like, if you were going to recommend a resource or a couple resources to help someone like me learn more about this history and what's currently going on, what resources would you recommend?
I feel like this question was planted by me. And it wasn't, I swear. But come to the Modern Military website. So we literally just had our 30th anniversary. It wasn't always called Modern Military. It began as Service Members Legal Defense Network prior even to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, when service members were being expelled for being gay. And so having our 30th anniversary, we just put out a magazine issue celebrating that, interviewing members and founders and key leaders in each of the orgs that led up to Modern Military. And through those interviews, you can really see how the fight for equality in military service and the fight for families equality during DOMA was won. And it was a beautiful learning experience for me to speak to the actual people who were doing that fight back in the day, and gives me ideas about how we need to fight for our military children today. And then the other thing I'd point out is I don't know if you can see it. We just published our 3rd edition of the Freedom to Serve Guide. And that is like the definitive guide for LGBTQ military service. It's got all the updates on HIV positive service and the lawsuits that were recently won there, updates on transgender service. And so it's got a lot of great stuff, which also leads me to the wonderful resource that Becca wrote.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the shout out. Yeah, I mean, I think specifically the publication that Cathy's talking about is really designed for military families with LGBTQ children and teens and even young adults. So that's certainly a good resource to check out. I would also say too, for allies, I mean, I think the biggest thing you could do would be talk to the military families who are going through this. I think there's so many people. I mean, certainly when I kind of tell people about all these issues facing military families, it's just not something, if you're not in the military, you don't know about it. And it's really quickly becoming an issue that down the road could affect national security. So I think, you've got people who are leaving the military, and certainly this younger generation, if they feel like they're not going to be welcomed and safe in locations where they could serve, they're not going to join the military. So, this really is an issue that could end up affecting far more people than just military families with LGBTQ kids. So I think hearing those stories and then continuing to share their stories with others, certainly sharing their stories with lawmakers and policymakers to try and get this information out there, I think that's what's really going to start making a difference.
Yeah. If I could just jump in and say that we did a recent internal poll, and 95% of the respondents answered yes to the question, have you altered your military career because of anti-LGBTQ laws. So to echo Becca, this is a readiness and retention issue.
Mhm.
People want to be patriotic and serve their country, and they're having to weigh that against the civil rights of their children. And it's not a choice we should have to make.
Yeah. Well, and I just wanted to note that we often, for these conversations, will offer a couple of bonus reads or bonus resources for people that would like to learn more. And one of the articles we shared this month was from The Advocate by a journalist named Christopher Wiggins. And the sort of headline was Pentagon officials fear anti-LGBTQ plus laws could impact military readiness. And I have to admit, it had never crossed my mind that that was a possibility. It had never, even because I'm not somebody that comes from a military family, I don't know a lot about all of the issues that you all are talking about. It had just never occurred to me that that was a possibility, but it seems so obvious when you see it written down on paper, when you hear mothers and spouses like you sharing your experiences and talking about choices your families have had to make. So I very much appreciate that. It does also bring me to another question, and this is a little bit more of a personal one, and one where I will admit my sort of ongoing lack of knowledge. But why do you think there are so many people like me that are just like, well, that's separate. I don't need to know about that. I don't know about the experiences of families in the military. Like, how does that happen?
Very few people serve, right? It's Becca, do you know the number? It's very small.
For some reason, I was thinking 1%, but I could totally be wrong on that.
It's close to that, whatever it is. Maybe someone in the comments will give us the real number, but it's a very small percent that actually serve in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might not be seeing military families in your daily life. And there's also a lot of people that just kind of do quiet service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or are not flaunting it and are certainly not going to flaunt our hardships.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like people aren't going to talk, woe is me. Like for instance, with the Tommy Tuberville situation, and all these military families are being impacted, but you're not really hearing from them because we just put our heads down and get through it. So I love that we're able to talk about it today. And some of the really challenging times families are going through right now.
Yeah.
I think to piggyback off of that, there's so much information coming at us from so many sides about so many issues that I think if it doesn't impact you personally, it's just not something you think about. There's too many other things to think about. So I think that's where conversations like this come in so handy, because it gives us a chance to, tell people about what's going on, where otherwise, I think like Cathy said, the military family way is to just sort of, put your head down and get through it. Right. So it's not something that military families are necessarily going to talk about, especially in a public forum. I think there's a lot of ways that there's a lot of reasons that people aren't paying attention, not necessarily because they don't want to, but just there's so much other information coming at us all the time.
Yeah, well, I will note someone that has joined us on social media noted that they just did a quick Google search and they saw 7% had served, but that seemed a little bit high. So somewhere between 1 and 7, I'm guessing.
Right, somewhere between there.
Now, as we wrap up, we've got a little bit more than 5 minutes left. I want to talk about the role that people like me and folks that have joined us today can play. So in your opinions, what do you think nationally based LGBTQ plus organizations like PFLAG can do to support military families in communities across the country? And Becca, let's start with you on this one.
Okay, sure. I think, organizations like MMAA for sure are doing the work. They've got the connections to get in with the people who are making these decisions and making these policies. So I think that's where the change really needs to happen. Certainly PFLAG has been great as far as personal connections, support from kind of within, connecting military families to other military families. But really the change, the way this is going to change is if big organizations that are connected can start having those conversations and start opening up that dialogue and talking about, this isn't just a political issue, a social issue. This is going to become a security issue if we don't start addressing it. And so I think that's where it's really important to have voices from a variety of different organizations coming together and saying, this is something we need to address.
Yeah, and highlighting that 6% of the armed forces are LGBTQ. And like I mentioned earlier, we're talking about, on a low number, 50,000 LGBTQ military affiliated youth. So, it's not a small number of people that are going to be moving around the country that are going to be really impacted by these laws. I mean, would you willingly move somewhere where your child was not going to be able to play sports? It's, we're having to make these decisions. And so understanding that the military is not a monolith, like we represent the same diversity of America. Those are the same people serving that make up America. And so, yeah, it's not political. We just want to live our lives, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we talked a little bit about the organizational level, and Becca, I think you started to touch on the things that sort of individual allies can do. But do you have any additional recommendations, again, for people like me who'd like to show up a little bit better than we have been, to provide that support to LGBTQ plus service members or to parents like you who have LGBTQ plus children?
I mean, the first thing I would say as a parent who's kind of living this is check in on those parents. Like we're exhausted. We're exhausted. Being a military family is hard enough. I mean, that's so challenging anyway, but there's so many of us that now have this additional stress in our lives. And so from an allyship perspective, yeah, just check in on us. Make sure we're doing okay. See how you can help. And then kind of stepping back on a broader scale, just continue to educate yourself and listen to the stories and read and share with others, I think is what I said before too. Tell other people what's going on, because I think it's just people don't really understand the magnitude of what's happening right now.
Thank you for that. And Cathy, I think you're going to get the last word. Any advice for individual allies like me that want to show up a little bit better than we have been so far?
Just understanding that the laws that you might be voting for in your own state actually impact the wider country, and kind of like keep that in mind when you're in the voting booth, that you're voting for laws that are going to impact national security in a way. And just, yeah, keeping that in mind. And then my soapbox is that I would really love, as we talked about some of the confusion of families really don't know what their options are, I would love to get kind of a cohesive plan for how we're going to help LGBTQ military families from the powers that be, because we're just kind of left drifting in the wind, and it's not a great place to be, right?
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for your time today, for educating me on so much. We just appreciate the work that you've been doing with that military families program. You're wonderful. Thank you. I'm sure we will be together again to talk about this. And Cathy, with a plug for voting, you're my new bestie. So until next time.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this month for Something to Talk About Live. We will see you next month, where we will be having some great conversation about a new topic. So until then, happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you in December.